Frederick Ignatius Cowles was a British writer and admirer of Montague wrote James. Born at Cambridge in 1900, he worked as a librarian and was introduced to the supernatural at age 17 by a Benedictine monk persuading him to read the works of Algernon Blackwood. His first collection of ghost fiction, The Horror of Abbots Grange, published in 1936, apparently caused a stir among his acquaintances when originally published. A female relation, finding the book beneath the Christmas tree, wrote back to him saying he ought to be locked up for writing, quote, such a beastly book. 2 years later he published The Night Wind Howls, the final collection published during his lifetime, with a third collection left unpublished at his death in 1949, which was only republished in 1983 along with his other ghost stories from his remaining 2 collections in Fear Walks the Night in 1993, later reprinted by Ash Tree Press in 1999. Besides ghost stories, Cowles also wrote children's books and books about gypsy culture, producing, for example, Gypsy Caravan, a collection of portraits of some of the gypsies he had met during his travels in Europe. Cowles' own grandmother was a Spanish gypsy his grandfather had taken to England, and she shared her own stock of gypsy tales with the youth. Until being republished in the 1990s, Cowles' books were incredibly rare and expensive. His first collection reportedly going for thousands of dollars if it was even offered for sale at all. Looking up online, I found a copy of The Horror of Abbots Grange for £2,500. Rendezvous, the first story, is a Charles Birkin-esque tale of a notorious rebel awaiting execution for his heinous crimes while getting a visit from a very unusual visitor in his cell who seems to know every vile deed he had ever done. The House of the Dancer has a man fall under the spell of a long-dead dancer, Valérie de Brisson, whose miniature adorned with her own hair promises him that he shall have, quote, her own white body if he finds and kills her last lover reincarnated. Since in death as in life, Valérie de Brisson only takes on another lover after having violently gotten away with the previous one. The setting may remind one of the tales of Michel de Gelderod. Wood Magic is the tragic story of a young girl preyed upon by the malicious spirit of a deranged murderous wizard who had died in the local woods centuries earlier when he had tried to cheat the devil. Twisted Face is a more traditional ghost story where a man renting out the ever-so-popular abandoned house, which the people managing the property really do not want to rent him. And how often must a character in a story ignore these obvious alarm bells before we seriously question their mental efficiency? Nevertheless, the renter does in fact rent the house, and on his first day in he sees not only the ghost of a murdered little girl, but also the corpse of her murderer supernaturally manifesting to him in the way it was found upon his death. The story seems a bit pointless because even though the girl's spirit appears around a specific part on the property, the proprietor does not want to actually dig up the ground there so that we don't even get the body of the girl recovered for burial. June Morning is a short affair reminiscent of Blackwood in his more good-natured, etheric mood, while The Witchfinder is a grisly affair showing the mental torture and death of a witchfinder in Old England, presumably at the hands of his victims, who are implied to have been real witches all along. The Florentine Mirror has yet another person buy an artifact that the seller is really keen at selling at any possible price just to get rid of it. Again, everyone who has any kind of genre savviness at all should have immediate alarm bells ringing off, but apparently this guy just doesn't read very much. And true enough, the spirit of a malevolent sorcerer is captured inside the mirror and forces the man who bought said mirror to commit murders for the wizard's own benefit. Who could have seen that one coming, eh? The Vampire of Kaldenstein is a rather predictable affair of a man stumbling onto a secluded village where no burial has taken place at the Count's castle for 3 centuries and where everyone closes their windows at night lest he receive a visit from the Count of Kaldenstein. And despite having had a close scrape the night before because he had left his window open, the narrator still is fool enough to outright demand to go visit the castle, ending up with him having to be rescued by the local priest. Which is apparently the 3rd time in the last few years that priest has effected just such a rescue, which really doesn't make your antagonist seem that much competent if a local small-time priest can just routinely knock at your door and snatch away every chance victim that ever comes your way. Lavender Love is a bit of a twist on the old haunted house formula. We have a woman here remembering her past life and the thwarted life she'd experienced during it, and she actually experiences her past life again through interacting with the ghosts and illusionary presences of the people from her past life inside of the abandoned old house where her past life took place. She is even able to interact with these illusionary beings and tells them at one point they've been dead and buried for 2 centuries, which they of course don't believe. The Mask of Death, meanwhile, is the story of a wicked Russian mask maker who falls in love with a gypsy who refuses him, and so the mask maker sells her soul to the devil to possess her for 1 year and 1 day, and then plans out revenge against the gypsy and her actual lover. King of Hearts is once again a more light-hearted affair in the Blackwoodian tradition, focusing on a man who comes face to face with the spirit of Bonnie Prince Charlie and pledges his own allegiance to the prince's cause centuries after the prince's death. The title of Voodoo doesn't exactly leave much to the imagination. We have 3 Englishmen attempting to break up a voodoo ceremony involving child sacrifice in Haiti, and then we experience the horrible curse that each of the voodoo priests maliciously inflict upon each of the Englishmen. The Little Saint of Hell gives us the story of an old statue from a village square which was considered to grant wishes if one was to sleep under it, and we have a man who does just that, who also incidentally gets himself carried away to a witch's summit, and then when he asks for his reward, he gets it, but is done in by his lack of specificity. Confession is a bit of a dud. Basically, a man accused of murder is forced to confess after being almost exonerated due to the presence of the ghost of his victim, which only he can see. The Lamassery of Beloved Dreams is another tale in the style of old Algernon, where a man describes his arrival, mysterious and inexplicable, at a phantasmal lamasery where he's promised to find the long-lost love of his life upon death. The cadaver of Bishop Louise has a researcher and a local priest find a walled-in tomb of a former bishop who had been deposed due to his occult dabblings. The tomb and the secret compartment therein is examined very thoroughly until one of these researchers takes it all too much to heart, so to say, and they decide to wall the tomb in yet again. Out of the Darkness is a bit less successful, as it has a woman killed by the ghost of a car that crashed on a certain road at a certain point in the past. The woman dying because she and her husband got turned around to this road by accident at night. The Lover of the Dead, however, is a grisly little tale of a man's visit to a madman's house following his car breaking down, where he finds said madman sitting in the darkness with his dead wife. The Caretaker is, on the other hand, a bit more of a minor thing, where a man runs into the ghost of the old butler who used to serve in an old house that is about to be condemned. Gypsy Violin is a piece where a rather nasty piece of work gets his way, and I didn't really like that. We have a half-gypsy violinist who sways a woman off her feet to make her marry him, but who runs away with an acquaintance of his before they can get married. So he uses his violin skills to permanently make her go blind on stage, which I consider quite the dick move to do, then to drive her manager incurably insane, and then to kill her husband when he comes to plead with him to undo what he had done. Death in the Well is the story of a quest to find a mystical pearl hidden away by a monk beheaded for sorcery inside of a well, and the death of the researcher who goes to find this pearl is, well, already spoiled both in the title and in the opening paragraph, so me mentioning it here shouldn't be a big deal. Retribution is another story with a questionable resolution. We have a woman who is cursed to be horrifically burned to death at the 10-year anniversary of the death of her romantic rival, whom she left to die just in the same fashion, except Cowles clearly states that 1. The original victim went back into the room to save certain documents during a fire and closed the door on herself by accident. 2. The door could only be opened by a key. And 3. The key was stowed away in the woman's handbag, which was deposited on the floor below, where Cowles specifies the quote-unquote murderess was unable to get to. Yet, just because the situation suited her in the end, the woman is horrifically murdered, and the narrator says how he finds this woman that he knew dying a terrible, agonizing death for something she could do nothing about either way, to have overall been an act of just retribution, which I find quite the incomprehensible attitude to have. Lady of Lyonesse, meanwhile, narrates a priest becoming enchanted by a fairy being from the mythical island of Lyonesse, how she persuades him to allow her and her associates to commit blasphemous acts in the church itself, and then eventually to lead him away to said undersea island of Lyonesse forever. Yet somehow he still ends up being tortured by her in the end for some reason. Finally, Rats has yet another judge sentencing a witch to death find horrific retribution when he insists on burning down her house with his own hands. and given the title you can probably guess at least part of what that retribution ends up being. Overall, an interesting book, a mix of the more nasty side of M.R. James with the more softer side of Algernon Blackwood, and definitely worth a read.